everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy June 1st. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights Live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. How's it going, guys?
Summer's here already, instantly. Instant summer.
On today's episode, we are talking about universal analytics data migration. If you have been living under a rock or have been willfully ignorant of the fact that Google has made a change to their web analytics platform, from today, where the show is live, you have 30 days to get your Google Analytics 4 instance set up, because in 30 days, you will not be able to collect data in Universal Analytics. If you need help with that, contact us or take our course at trustinsights.ai/GA4 course, or you can contact us and talk with John, our chief statistician.
That's it. One standard deviation from getting it done for you.
But so what we're talking about today is, so one of the things that Google has not done a good job of making people aware of, and I did a very informal poll on this topic on social media, was your Universal Analytics data will not exist in the GA4 instance, and your Universal Analytics data will only be available for a few more months after July 1st. They have not set a date for that, but they're sort of hinting around like 6-ish months. For all we know, they're going to cut that much shorter. So basically, if you want to do any kind of historical look back, you need to do something and get that data out of your Universal Analytics system into a different system. And that's what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk you through how to prepare for Universal Analytics data migration, how to extract your Universal Analytics, and pitfalls to avoid with a Universal Analytics data migration. And so, John, you may be the chief statistician, but Chris is our chief technologist. So, Chris, where would you like to start?
Well, here's where we should start. And this goes to what you were talking about in the newsletter yesterday, Katie. Do you actually need the data?
It's a really big question. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because we're data hoarders. We're all data hoarders. We think we need the data. We might need the data. Maybe we don't need the data today, but what if somebody asks me a question tomorrow and I already said I don't want the data? So there's a lot of anxiety around leaving this Universal Analytics data behind. Forget the fact that it's not one-to-one with Google Analytics 4. That's a whole different issue. That's a whole different ball of wax. But, God forbid someone asks me what happened on June 1st, 2016, and I don't have that data. What am I going to do? Well, does anyone really care? Probably not.
It's true. And so there's three-ish, four-ish levels of data backup that you can do for Universal Analytics. And we'll talk through each of these. There's quick snapshots. There's selected data through the API, and then there is full backup through a third-party service of some kind. And it can either be cloud hosted or it can be locally hosted, depending on the requirements. And so this is why we keep coming back to those user statements, right? What is the user statement behind Universal Analytics? So Katie, for you, as the CEO of the company, what is your user statement around Universal Analytics, or do you not care?
It's not that I don't care, but I'm having a hard time justifying the need to keep that data around. It's not data that I, at this time, would make a decision on. So present day data, data from the past month, data from the past couple of months, I can look at that and make some decisions. But data from a couple of years ago, I'm not going to make a decision with that. I'm going to look at it and go, okay, that was interesting. But the company is so different in terms of our marketing tactics, our services, the maturity of the company, the audience of the company. Like, it's not the same as it was when we first launched. Plus, 3 years of that data was during the pandemic. And so the data is not what we would expect it to be anyway for us. And so I don't personally see the usefulness of having a backup of all that data. What I would probably prefer is I could take some screenshots of existing dashboards and refer back to that and just say, oh, that's what the data looked like on that day. But that's about it. I don't really feel the need to keep all the data, but that's me.
John, what about you? Since Marketing Over Coffee's had a website since like 2007, we have 16 years of Universal Analytics data.
Yeah, the data, Katie nailed it with, snapshots are good enough. Like having a rough idea of, okay, here was how much traffic per year, maybe enough to break it down by month, and to know the channels, that we would expect 20% to come from social and 20% to come from Apple. And that's really enough, unless you have pretty much, if you're an organization where you have a VP of marketing or a CMO and you have a team of at least 3 or 4 people, then you're getting to the point where you want to have that data to prove ad budgets. And, if you have to prove anything over $300,000 or $400,000, now you're talking about, okay, and our classic rule on that of 20% set aside for measuring, if you're at 400 grand, well, now you can talk about spending 70, 80 grand building a database that you could go back and query, and that would be worthwhile. But yeah, for Marketing Over Coffee, it's not, we have a rough idea of how much traffic we should have. And the other thing is we're really only tactically focused, right? Like I only need to know, okay, I turned on the ads this week. Did we do better than last week? It's not like I'm not looking at seasonal podcast trends or, over multi-year analysis, because that's just, don't have the bandwidth for that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
What I'm likely going to do is put together a couple of Looker Studio dashboards that are tables that are, here's 2022, here's 2021, and break it down by month of like the top 3 metrics that I care about in Google Analytics, and then take screenshots of those, stick them in a deck, and if I ever need them, then they're sitting in my folder somewhere.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think we can talk through the first couple of those scenarios pretty easily. So the first scenario really is that whole, hey, I just want to know the basics. So you go into Universal Analytics, maybe you go into your audience, go into your overview. Mm-hmm. And so Trust Insights, we've been around for quite some time. So I'm going to crank this back to 2017. And here is, of course, our data for the last 5-ish years. At this point, you can just hit export, punch out your CSV, and now you've got your basic user data, right? Mm-hmm. Stored in the format of your choice. Super easy to get at this data, right? Very, very straightforward. And if that's all you need, that's probably good enough, right? There's not a lot of complexity to this. Same is true if you wanted to do this by channel, right? You can export this data by channel. You'll get the same table, and then you'll get the individual channels. Now, this is not broken out over time. These are just the totals. So that's what's going to come out in the table tabular data. But again, very straightforward. This requires obviously 0 technical skill, right? You just got to find the charts that you care about. And I would suggest if you've got the time and the inclination to do so, you can have someone go through each of the major screens. So you would identify which screens you want to have export, like maybe it's all pages data, and one by one, boom, export CSV over and over and over again. This is arguably the least efficient way to do this, but it is also the lowest tech way to do this.
You say arguably the least efficient, but it depends on how much data and how many properties you're working with. So for us, I would say this is good enough, because what I would do is I would bring these CSV files into, Tableau, for example, put together my workbooks, and boom, done. It's all done. I don't need to worry about it. I can refer to it whenever I need it. So for us, I would say it probably is the most efficient, because we're not looking at landing pages and, a lot of the other stuff that comes with it. It's just not what we need for data. So I would say for us, it probably is the best option.
Okay. I disagree, but that's okay.
Well, you go back to data hoarders.
Yes, exactly. So the second way, which is kind of what John was talking about, if you're specifically interested in things like acquisition channels in the past, like if you wanted to see like, hey, here's when we ran ads, for example, it's going to be very difficult to sew that all together from all the individual CSV exports. It can be done, but it's not going to be pretty. This way requires some technical know-how. you would be asking the Google Analytics API for specific information. So this is an R script that we write. This is actually a data exporting facility. And what we've done is you're allowed to choose up to 10 metrics and 7 dimensions to export. So you would go through your user stories, right? As a podcast owner, I need to understand the marketing channel usage over time so that I can make decisions about what platforms I should be continuing to run, something along those lines. From that user story, you then figure out what are the 7 dimensions. You can have up to 7, and there's like 210, but you have up to 7 in an export and up to 10 different metrics, so numerical values. So these are the ones that we see clients asking about the most. It is sessions, page views, new users, bounces, session duration, organic searches, users as the metrics, and obviously the date, the source medium, the campaign, the page, the user type, the landing page, and the country as sort of being that mix of variables. And then what this script does is it goes week by week from the starting date, which we just set to 2017, through today, and exports all that data into a local database. So it's there's a database system called SQLite that is a flat file database. You can obviously push it to Google BigQuery if you wanted to have it accessible in Data Studio dashboards. You could push it to a MySQL database or the database platform of your choice. But this is sort of the second method. It's not the full data, but it's enough and it's granular enough for a lot of people's basic year-over-year decision making to be able to make decisions from it.
So this is where in the newsletter yesterday, I think a user story is good to start with, but the way to really focus that is to do a KPI map. Because that's really going to help you, for us, we're looking at the metrics that are most commonly asked for, but that's not going to be the same company to company. Some companies may not care about page views or bounces. They may care about, specific cart fills or events or, whatever the thing is. So doing that KPI map is going to help focus that in, especially if you're limited to the number of data points that you can export through the API.
Yep, exactly. And I think those KPI maps would be super helpful to do. And what you end up with is you end up with a database. You end up with a database of some kind that has all the information that you've requested in all of those different fields, and it's available for you to slice and dice. And so that is sort of the net output. Now, when we ran this was about 104 megabytes worth of data for 5 years. So for Trust Insights, in those first 2 years, we didn't have a ton of traffic. So this could get to be a very large database, depending on the size of your Google Analytics installation, how many people visit your website, and so on and so forth. So this is method number 2.
So let me ask you, Chris. So when we were talking about method number 1, and I said that those CSV exports were good enough, you said you disagreed. What is it that you feel in your role that we need from our data?
The challenge for me with the CSV exports is that many of the measures are not necessarily one-to-one on a given date, and to have those exports, you would unify them by the dates, and so extracting it all this way gives you the different dimensions, which may have different scopes and timescales, all unified into one table, so that you can look at, okay, at this session, these 2 sessions were from China on this day, which were 2 new users, and so on and so forth. You won't get that level of granularity in the CSV export. So you get the very high level, which again, for some companies is totally fine. But if I wanted to look at only traffic from China, or only new visitors, or only visits to the homepage from a specific channel, you can't do that from the CSV exports because they're not granular enough.
To be fair, is that something you currently do with our data?
It is when we do our once a year anniversary posts. We go back and say, like, here's what's changed over the last 5 years. Realistically, from a marketing tactical perspective, we rarely look back more than a year. From a historical anniversary, hey, this is where we were 5 years ago. Yes, that's when we pull out this data.
And I think for a lot of companies, those are the hard decisions that they are going to wrestle with of do we really need more than a year's worth of data? If you set up Google Analytics for, a year ago, you have that year's worth of data. You don't need to worry about universal analytics at all. And that's, companies are going to have a hard time. It's like cleaning. I talk about it before. It's like cleaning out your closet. That blue sweater that's been sitting on the floor for the past 5 years that you haven't worn, it's okay to get rid of it. But, in your brain is telling you, but I'm going to need it tomorrow. If I get rid of it, I'm going to need it tomorrow. And then it becomes an obsession. You start thinking about only that blue sweater and you're convinced I can't get rid of it. I have to have it. And so bringing in an outside company who can ask you those questions and help you make those decisions might be a good, way to go with this, because you do end up data hoarding. You do end up taking unnecessary steps to hold on to things that you don't need. But this, one person's opinion, I love throwing things away. I hate extra stuff. I hate clutter. So for me, good, great, be gone, done.
You can go full Marie Kondo. You can be like,
Yes.
I only keep data that brings me joy. Everything
And
else,
none of it brings me joy.
the accountants don't like that. That doesn't work for all businesses. That's not a best practice.
It comes down to risk too, risk mitigation, right? Because you could make the same general argument about things like health insurance. Like, nothing's wrong. Nothing's been wrong for 5 years. I don't need this. Like, well, the risk of not having that is very, very high, right? Now, with your universal analytics data, is there a substantial risk? To John's point, it depends. If your auditors come knocking, yeah, you might need that data. There might be a case where, like, you need to pull out, this is how much traffic we got from this place. If you were working, for example, in a highly regulated industry, yeah, you might be asked, we need 7 years worth of data for traffic to your website from the United Arab Emirates. And you're like,
But I feel like this is information you would already know about your business. Like, if you're just figuring out now that you work in a regulated industry and you might be audited, that's a whole different conversation if you are unaware of this. And so for companies that, don't have those regulations and rules already in place, companies like ours, who, we're not going to be audited by the number of people coming to our website on May 21st, 3 years ago on a random Saturday. Like, nobody cares. So why are we holding on to that data? And those are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves, but answering honestly.
I recall a certain former company we worked with, when it was acquired, we were asked to produce 5 years of website data for the acquisition. So if there's a remote but non-zero possibility, Katie, that in 3 years we sell Trust Insights for $1 billion, and part of the due diligence says, hey, we need 5 years of website data.
And that all goes through that scenario planning as you're trying to figure out. And that's a totally valid question. And so internally, the questions we would be asking are, do we think that there's a chance that we might be acquired? Do we think that there's a chance that, what are the different scenarios that would exist that somebody would need 5 years worth of data? And so those are the different exercises that you should be going through with your team.
Exactly. I will say, if you do want to buy Trust Insights for $1 billion, just email us and just ask for Katie.
That's right. Just ask for me directly. Bypass the chief statistician.
Okay. So method 1 for backup is just manual export. Method 2 for backup is selective export from the Google Analytics API for the key variables that you want to know. Method 3 is to use a third-party service of some kind that can rip all of the data out of the Universal Analytics and store it somewhere else. The system that we have had success with and a lot of struggle with for doing this is a open source system called Matomo. So Matomo, which you can find at matomo.org, allows you to set up a Google Analytics import and connect it to your existing Google Analytics account and vacuum up the data. And there's 2 flavors. There is the cloud hosted flavor, where you can just sign up for the cloud account. And then you go in, for example, this is the dashboard. You go into your setting, go into your system, choose Google Analytics import, and then you run face first into the configuration of this very complex process to export it. That's flavor 1 of Matomo. Flavor 2 of Matomo is to set up your own server that you host with their software, because it's open source software. Again, set up the importer and stuff like that, and then vacuum up the data. The two differences that you would want to tackle, if the cloud hosted version has a limitation of 2 years, so it can only hold on to the last 2 years worth of data. The self-hosted version, you can have it all. So for example, when I go to back up my website, I'm going to use the cloud host, the server hosted one, because I would like to keep all 13 years of my website's data. No special reason. I just like having it because I'm a data hoarder.
Admitting it is the first step.
It really is. Now, the other thing is both methods, but particularly the self-hosted method, has a very high technical bar. It is. I did a setup yesterday for giggles, and I documented the process. And it took me, who's a reasonably technically competent person, about 2 hours to do it. We prepared a very special music video of the experience. It is not 2 hours long. Not 2 hours long. It's only 90 seconds, but so that is the process.
Got it? You write it all down? No, and I think that it's worth noting that if you want something that captures, there's a lot of companies that do have 13 years worth of data, and they have valid reasons to keep all of that data, so they would need to go through a process like that. But being clear about what specifically they're collecting and keeping and making decisions on. And again, we sort of keep joking, half joking, but it's the kind of thing that we can help with. Because, if someone came to me and said, all right, you have 5 years worth of Trust Insights data, you need to keep all of it, I'd go to you. I'd be like, okay, Chris, good. Got some time? Because I'm not the technical person on the team. And so either version of that in Matomo is going to be a struggle for someone like me.
Yes, particularly the API setup, because you have to go into your Google Cloud Platform account. If you don't have one, you need one of those first. You have to go into Google Platform account, set up an app, and then take the app, set up OAuth credentials, set up the OAuth endpoints, authorize them, then take the JSON authorization file and bring that into Matomo to authorize it, and then you go through the web auth for that. So there's multiple steps that apply to either version. That sounded like words.
Yeah, I mean, it was words. Don't know what
Once
they
that's
meant.
built, though, can't you just use that as your analytics too, though? I mean, or is that solely an export and database?
You absolutely can. And in fact, there are, when we switched over to Google Analytics 4 back in October of 2020, we installed Matomo Analytics on the Trusted Insights website as a backup, because at that time we weren't really sure how well it was going to work. And so we run Matomo in parallel to our website. I've had it running on my own website for about 5 years now. There's actually a version for it. If you run a WordPress site, there's a version that runs right inside your WordPress instance. It requires much less setup and does a really terrific job. So yeah, you can use that as your web analytics as well. You should be using it as your web analytics if you are in the EU. Right? If you are doing business in the EU, Matomo is one of the very self-hosted, is one of the few web analytics packages that is fully GDPR compliant. As of today, June 1st of 2023, Google Analytics still is not GDPR compliant. GA4 is still not compliant. And so at any time, the EU could drop the hammer on Google and say, nope, you're not allowed to use this here. Matomo would give you that option.
So, technical hurdles aside, what are there pros and cons to holding on to your Google Analytics data other than, it makes you feel comfortable?
So, I mean, the pros is you have the data if you do need it, even if it's just for that once a year anniversary look back blog post, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do any kind of long-term trend analysis, like multi-year analysis, you want to have that available. If you just like data as a security blanket, it's it's available. And 5 years of data for us worked out to about 104 megabytes. So it's not exactly a huge piece of information. You can stick that on a flash drive, and just put it away somewhere, and it's there in case you need it. The cons are, there's the technical hurdles to get set up and get the data extracted is sizable. Even for a technically proficient person, it is sizable to go through all the steps. It's not something that people would have a lot of practice doing, because it's not something you have to do very much. There's no downside risk to your data. Obviously, you can't erase data from Google Analytics. And if you store it in an open database format of some kind, then there's no risks there. But it does consume some space, not a lot, but some. And the big thing for folks is it consumes time. Right? It consumes time and resources to do the process. Matomo backs up about 7 days every hour is what it was pacing at. So it's going to be a couple of weeks before it finishes with our 5 years worth of data. It's going to take about a month for my website with 13 years of data. And so if you need it and you have not gotten started, and say Google announces January 1, 2024, it's all going away, and you start this Christmas week, you are in a lot of trouble, right? So this would be one of those things where if you know you're going to need it, sooner is better to get this going.
Is there a risk? So we've seen this with past clients using Universal Analytics. Is there a risk that you might accidentally export and store PII information, so personally identifiable information? And so how do you make sure you don't do that?
Well, first, if you have PII or SPI within your Google Analytics, you're in violation of the terms of service, and you could be kicked off of Google Analytics literally at any moment if they discover it. So you definitely want to audit your Google Analytics instance to make sure you're not capturing that data in the first place. The place where that happens the most is in query parameters. So if you have an older form on your website that passes things through what's called a get versus a post mechanism, you'll have like an email address in the URL of the site, and then that gets trapped. The easiest way to deal with that, once you're done with the extraction and you have in a database of some kind, you can write a short script that can look for like URLs with the @ symbol, because there's no website URL that reasonably should have the @ symbol in it, right? And that's one of the easiest tests to look for, is like look for the @ symbol in a URL. If there is, you probably have PII in there somewhere, and then scrub that out and cautiously write some scripts to remove that information from your website. You can substitute it with like a numerical ID if you happen to
Mhm.
need IDs of some kind or an MD5 hash, but you definitely would want to scrub that out. And then, as with anything, you'd want to secure that data. Like you probably should not run this on a public web host with no passwords. That would be a really bad idea.
And I think that those are some of the pitfalls that we need to think about, because it's, to your point, the technical hurdles aside, there's other considerations with exporting and storing this data. I can tell you horror stories of what a company I used to work for did with protected health information, because they just, we were all ignorant to what those regulations were in terms of proper data storage. And so that's probably step one, is get educated on data storage securely and what is considered personally identifiable information, and if you are accidentally collecting any of it, because it does come with big federal fines. Like, it's not an inexpensive issue if you get caught. Even if you didn't mean it, it's still, the federal government doesn't care. They're still going to fine you, at least 5 or 6 figures.
Yeah. If you are in a highly regulated industry, your best bet for safety is to buy one of these like little mini PCs that you can get like on Amazon for like $200. So as long as it's got, 512 gig of storage and like 16 gig of RAM, they're like $300. Or preferably have your IT team do this, right? You have them set this up in your data center. You run Ubuntu Linux on it, the 2204 LTS version, which is long-term safety. And then you install like everything that you just saw in the musical video. You install that on that machine. That machine is then behind your firewall in your data center. Your data is on your network, doesn't leave your network, and that is the safest way to protect it. That way, it's totally under control. And if you're audited, if there's a security team comes by, that's the way to handle it. That way, you know for sure where your data lives. It's in your data center on a little box.
Yeah, don't just put it into this little box and then stick it in the top drawer of your desk. That's a bad idea.
Yes, that's a bad idea. I mean, even if you have like an old laptop laying around, you could do that. If the laptop's less than 5 years old, again, work with your corporate IT team, get it into your data center, and it's a good way to repurpose old hardware. There are versions of Matomo that you can scale down to even run on a little Raspberry Pi, those little hobbyist boxes. And I might not go that route because they're not built for enterprise grade reliability. But if you got one laying around and you got a small website and you want to have it under your control, that's not a bad way to do it. But no matter what you do, having a clear plan of data security is a good idea. Like, we have one of those server boxes in my office here and stuff, because I want it on my local network so I can work with it quickly, but it's also behind a firewall, and it's got its own firewall on it as well, so that data that's stored on it can't go anywhere.
Unless someone breaks into your house and steals it, which is a different conversation that we should probably handle.
It is, but again, as long as you practice good data security and you don't have short passwords and stuff like that, all systems nowadays have encryption built into them. If you're not using it, you should. But even if someone wanders off with your laptop computer, at least the computers we use Macs, and these things have File Vault, and good luck getting data off of there. The federal government can't. They've repeatedly asked Apple for backdoors, and Apple's been like, no.
John, questions, thoughts, considerations?
Yeah, no, I would definitely rob Chris's neighbors before I would rob him. Like, I know that's a huge mistake to invade the Penn household. So yeah, his data.
Okay.
All right. So migrating Universal Analytics data. First, you have to decide whether or not you're going to need it. If you're going to need it, there's a few different ways to handle it. I personally feel like exporting a few CSVs and sticking them into some kind of a presentation and then filing it away for a rainy day is going to be the best bet for us. Chris disagrees, and so he went down a more technical route where he actually exported data from the API so he could have a full database table. And then the third most technical option is to import it into a system like Matomo, which does take a lot of technical expertise. And if that is not you, you should definitely find a consultant who can do that for you.
Exactly. I think most organizations will be fine with option 2. You name your key variables that you need to save, you export from the API, and you store that in a database somewhere. For the kinds of analysis most people need to do on a year-over-year basis, that's probably going to be good enough. But again, you have probably 6-ish months, 7-ish months to make the decisions. Make the decision soon. Like, make the decision before July 1 about what you're going to keep, and then do the migration, because you don't have to worry. Once July 1 hits, there's no new data to add, right? So you don't have to worry about keeping up with it. But when July 1 hits for Trust Insights, I'm going to rerun these scripts for us. I'm going to run them for Marketing Over Coffee. I'm going to run them for my personal website. We're going to have the data stored safely, and then we will have a nice drinking party for Universal Analytics. We'll send off with a champagne toast, and all continue to suffer with Google Analytics 4. So, to what Katie was saying, if this is something that you would like to have done for you, hit us up. We're happy to help. If you want to do it yourself, we have a course for that. Go take it. We probably should add an export chapter to the course. Maybe we'll do that in July as our farewell ceremony for that. But any parting words?
Get your act together. Clock's ticking.
Those are going to be my parting words too. So I think we're good.
All right. Thanks, folks. We will see you all next time. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.